myPLACE, finding my place, my people, my future.
Hey y'all, welcome to the myPLACE podcast. I'm joined today with my dad, Jay McSwain, and today we're talking about some of the things that you'll find in our new book that we just came out with, The Dark Sides of Personality and How to Overcome Them. And in one of the chapters, we talk a lot about what is my personality, explaining some of the assessment that we use and explaining what DISC, the DISC model, looks like. But really, we're talking too about what is some of the dark sides of even asking that question of what is my personality.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off in today's episode asking you, Mary, why do you think people, I'll use the word enamored, intrigued, desirous to take things like personality, and there's so many personality assessments out there, or to get what we like to call personal self-discovery? Why do you think people are so intrigued and enamored with it?
I do love that word that you use, enamored, because I think whether it be personality or anything that really has to do with ourselves, we are enamored by it. And I was thinking about that earlier today, asking myself that question, why are so many people so enamored and intrigued by their personality? If this sounds harsh, by themselves, if you will. Why do we love talking about ourselves or discovering it? And I think, honestly, it's so reflective of our culture and our society today. So many of the platforms that we have revolve around promoting oneself and discovering the highlight reel, the best parts about yourself, and how can I make this look better, make that look better? How can I improve here? Which in that sense, it's not always a bad thing. How can I grow? How can I get better? I think those elements of it are great because I think we have seen there's a lot of weaknesses that we have, and there's a lot of ways that we could be but aren't right now and want to get to. So there's a lot of different tools out there that help you grow into who you want to be, which I think that is valuable. But I think on the flip side of it is that we're so consumed with ourself and what we project and what other people see. I mean, the obvious one is social media, because that is so prevalent in today's society. We're always thinking about, how am I projecting myself and how are other people perceiving that? And that has a lot to do with how we even define personality. It's the inward and outward expression of who we are and how we act and how we interact with people. So I think even in how we define personality is reflective of what we're so consumed with in so many of these different facets of society and culture. And that's reflected in our personality. We see it through the lens of our personality. And so that's kind of some of the things that I was thinking of, is just that it's so prevalent and reflective in so many of the different platforms that we use today.
I want to, and when I first thought about that question, I really saw it enamored, why we're so, I really looked at it from such a negative perspective, that we are self-absorbed. And again, society is very self-absorbed today. I mean, it is. But this past week, I was sitting with a person, and it reminded me of the positive part of why we need to know ourselves. I was sitting with a person, and I said, you're really struggling with loving yourself. So some people are so sacrificial that they don't love themselves. And the Bible says that you ought to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you don't love yourself, it's really hard to love your neighbor. And so I think the healthy part, there are a lot of things that you and I talk about even in the book. We're going to get to that today also. But the healthy part of self-discovery, taking assessments, is learning how to love how God created you and not wishing that you're something else.
Mm-hmm. And even with that, you said we learn how God created us, and it takes me even back to the verse, we love others as yourself, as that. But we love because he first loved us. Mm. And that's where our love comes from. That's how we love our neighbor. That's how we love and appreciate ourselves. It's not out of it's not out of our own love. We are able to love, and we should love, we ought to, we can love, because he first loved us. And when we discover our design, I feel like that is a way that we see that he does love us, because he loved us so much that he gave us the gifts of our strengths, and he loves us so much that he offers to fill in the gaps and have his power be made perfect in our weakness. And that is one way that, and where we lack, he fills, and that's what draws us back to him. And so I think even in self-discovery, we learn and can appreciate and can love God all that much more, because we learn how he has fearfully and wonderfully made us, and how he knew us when he made us in our mother's womb. And so in learning all the intricate details, we love because we see that he did first love us and how he designed us.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool.
Yeah.
But with the discovery process, we talk about the dark sides of the discovery process and some of the pitfalls, some of the pros, some of the cons. What do you think are some of those dark sides of the discovery process of asking that question of what is my personality?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm the D, and I'm going to cut to the chase on this. But really, the reason I want you to respond more to it is we have 2 chapters in here, and I'm going to say it at a high level. And you wrote most of these 2 chapters, and we were asked by a pastor that interviewed us, what was our favorite chapter? And my favorite chapter that you worked on mostly is the dark side of discovery, distraction. And one of the dangers of personality assessments using tools like this is we can get distracted. So I'm going to cut to the chase, but you say it in the chapter so well. We can get so focused on the design that we lose focus of the designer. We can get so enamored with the creation, us, that we lose being enamored with the creator who created us. And so you're going to go into that more. But here's the other chapter that you did, and that was on comparisons. And you're gonna dive into both of these a lot more than I just have. So I'm gonna let you take and talk about those 2 distractions that can really not be positive.
Yes, and I did in the chapters, it sums up to the dark side of discovery, whether it be in the 2 main areas that I think we can see in Scripture, we can see when people take an assessment like ours, is comparison and distraction, which comparison is a way that distracts us from that very purpose.
Didn't you say this? Comparison is the enemy of contentment?
Yes.
I think that was a phrase, and that was like, that's a great phrase. So.
Yes, comparison is the enemy of contentment and the thief of joy. And it's one of the ways I think the enemy distracts us. He has so many strategies and tactics and ways to get in our head based off of how we respond to some of those temptations and distractions that he puts in our path. And he sees how we respond, and he plays into that, whether that be in comparison or distracting us. And when I open the chapter, y'all can go read it to really see how it's articulated. But one of the other books that I was reading as we were writing was The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And it's all about the different tactics that this demon in training was using to try and distract his patient from setting his eyes on God, from setting his focus on it. And if you go back to Genesis, go back to the garden, the first question that the serpent asked Eve was, did God really say? And he's distracting her. He's taking her focus off of what God had said and what she knew to be true. And he's distracting her with doubt and with questions that aren't from the Lord, but that are from the enemy, that are from the world, that are from her flesh, and placing her focus on her doubt, on her distraction, on her desire, on anything that the enemy can use to get our focus on the design and off of the designer, and whatever tactic he chooses or thinks is the most effective. I think he will try on us, because again, it's anything that he can do to keep our eyes off of God and our focus off of him, our trust off of him, anything like that. And so with an assessment like this, and what we try and harp on all the time is that it is a tool, but it's not the main focus. It's not the end all be all. We want to point you to the direction of your design, so that in turn your eyes look up to your designer, so that you become more in awe of him, so that you feel equipped to serve him more, so that you know how to love people better in the way that he intentionally designed you to love them better. And so I think one way that people fall short in this discovery process with so many tools like this is that they stop at the design and they don't point their eyes back up to the designer. They don't give him credit. They don't see how they can look inward to look outward to other people and to love them, to love God better, to appreciate him better. And so those are some of the ways that he distracts us, and how that is a dark side of the discovery process.
Yeah, there's something else in there that you did a really good job, is you talked about specifically how the D, I, S, and C, how it can be a distraction in a different way. Like the D and the I look at themselves a certain way, and the S and the C, and they're really different. So you want to talk about that a little bit? If not, I'll fill in what you don't say.
So I think
because I'm a D, so I'll fill in what you don't say, right?
Right. I think I talked about the distraction from a high level, but the thing with the discovery process and with learning your personality is that it is so specific to who you are. Your tendencies, again, what I said earlier, how the enemy will tempt you will be in light of and reflective of your personality, because that's kind of what gets to you, and that's how you're wired. Those are your tendencies. So like you were saying, a D and an I, and how the enemy might distract you is a D and an I would say, they would see their personality, they would look at all the wonderful ways that the Lord has created them, and they would think, oh, well, look at everything I have. I don't need anything else. I don't need anyone else. Or
I don't need him.
I don't need him, and I don't need them that are around me. And their confidence would turn into arrogance, and their ability would turn into pride and self-sufficiency, and not being reliant on the Lord, because they see what they have, and that's what they're all consumed by, and they don't see their need for the Lord. They don't see their need for other people. It turns their confidence into arrogance, and their ability into self-sufficiency. And so that is how the D or an I would see it.
I won't say which of the two, but both of them, it can turn into narcissism, because they think a whole lot of themselves and don't have a lot of humility, and it turns to narcissism. But the other side of the S and C. Sorry, I was a D. I interrupted you. Sorry. I wonder if you guys keep watching this, how many times that the D in me comes out. So sorry, Mary, I just interrupted you, but go back at it. You wrote most of the chapter, not me.
Well, as y'all are listening to it, you might be thinking, well, that is not me. I took y'all's assessment. I've taken an assessment before, and all I see is what I don't have. I see what everybody else has, and I don't become secure in who God says I am. I become insecure in who the assessment says that I'm not. And that would be a tendency, if you will, of an S or a C personality. So they're not distracted by all the ways that the personality assessment says that they're great. They're distracted by all the things that the personality assessment says that they're not. And instead of being inspired by their strengths and feeling equipped by God's power to make his power perfect in our weaknesses, all they see is what they don't have. And
they're defeated by what they see as limitations.
Yes, exactly. And that really too segues into, if you will, that comparison chapter. Because again, when you see what you have, you inevitably discover what you lack. When an S or a C personality sees what they lack, they see what other personalities have. They become distracted by the ways that the Lord has wired them, and their contentment is stolen because they're comparing themselves to other people, to where a D or an I personality might compare what they have to what others lack. It's the reverse of that. And so they once again are distracted by, we talk about 1 Corinthians 12 all the time, that we're all members of the body of Christ, and that no part of the body is more important. We all need each other to work together. And so in one sense, a C or an S would look at their part, their role in the body, and think, well, I'm not needed. It's not as important. I don't function in the same way that they do. I'm not as needed or as valuable. To where a D or an I personality would say, oh, look at my role in the body. I'm so much better. I'm so much more valuable. I'm so much more needed. And so again, the way that you view an assessment, the way that you come out of an assessment is a reflection of your personality, and it's a reflection of the tendencies that you have to view yourself, to view God, to view what he made you, to view other people. And if you don't have the right perspective on that, that would be a dark side of the discovery process, because the enemy would use anything in any way that he can to distract you from the way God intentionally designed you and intentionally gave you resources for you to look back to him and then serve others through that.
That's really good.
And so with that discovery process, we're talking a lot about common responses that people have. You've been doing this for, I say, a long time, a little bit. In the different ways that you've seen people...
That means I'm old, right?
No, that means your experience.
Okay. Oh, I like that.
Yes, that means you've garnered a lot of wisdom. What are some other ways that you've seen people respond to an assessment like this?
I've seen a lot of people not believing the results. I've seen that a lot, like, that's not really me. And it's like, well, you answered the statements, but I see people respond that way a lot. I see people responding in becoming, I saw this with a pastor years ago, becoming consumed, that they become somebody that, a personality type that they're not. I see a lot of people who don't like who they are or what the results say about themselves, and they push their, or they try to be something. Those are some of the ways that I've seen people respond to taking them. And I've seen a lot of people believe that they define them. And again, if you watch our podcasts, you're going to hear us talk about this a lot. People, the way they use them is they let them define them, and they don't let God. And so that's some of the ways that I've seen.
And one of the things you said is that after they see their results, it's as though they don't believe it, they don't think it's accurate. And so either their results are right and their response to it is, I'm going to do anything but what my results say. What about people, how often do you see, do they take the assessment, but their results aren't accurate? It's not who they are. Maybe they were answering for who they wish they were and not who they really were, or they were answering for what they thought was the right answer and not what was the right answer for who they are.
I have a really good story with this. So in the very, very early days of Place, we had a young lady, and our ministry would not be where it is today if it was not for the early days of investment that she put into it. She was an I personality, and she could do so much. I mean, she could get so much work done. She worked tirelessly for our ministry. Well, back in those days, we were doing 25 to 30 trainings where we'd bring in churches all over the country, and we were shipping lots of material, name tags, tons of boxes of material, and she wasn't the most detailed person. And she would have, the name tag would say the right spelling, but on their registration thing, it would have the wrong spelling, or the name tag would have the wrong spelling. And I'm not a real perfectionist, things like that don't really bother me. I want to correct them. And so I'd call her back and I'd say, hey, we need to, so when we start sending them information, emails, we got the right name, not misspelling their name. And she would get so offended with it. Offended. And it wasn't bothering me. Well, I'll never forget, we were doing a training somewhere, and she had traveled with me, and she took the personality assessment. And she was what we call the Spiker D, or C, like the real detail, perfectionist oriented. And she brought her results up to me. That's about all she had in her scores. She could, C, I'm a C. And so she didn't like that. She felt like she looked bad when she made these mistakes. So when she took it, she wanted to say, I'm a C. And she was no more a C than I was a C. So did that answer?
I think so, but how do you respond? Because you have sat down with so many people, looking at their assessments, talking with them, seeing how they respond to it. How, as someone who might see something, and this could be a question that a family member might ask, or a friend, when you see what their results say and you just don't think that is right. What do you say? How do you respond?
Very carefully.
Uh-huh.
Different responses. I don't have a one. So the D in me, I think my natural tendency is I'm gonna set them straight. But again, we talk so much, and this book is so much about walking in the Spirit. If I feel like it's going to hurt them, Mary, I don't respond. If I feel like they aren't grasping it, I really ask God to help me to determine, do I point it out? Sometimes, if again, coaching, that we're really big about this instrument and tool with, a lot of times I start asking questions. And I'll start writing word for word what they say. And most people will speak through the lens of their DISC personality. Like the D will say things like, I will do this. The S will say, I think, or I believe. So, but they'll talk through the lens. And then I try to ask questions based on what they're saying to guide them back to what may be more them. But again, truthfully, sometimes I feel like it would hurt them more and that they aren't able to receive it. So for me, walking in the Spirit is sometimes not saying anything. And if I do say things, I try to frame it through questions to help them see themselves.
And I think that is so reflective, too, of what we try and talk about a lot, is that the assessment is not the end all. It's a starting point. It's not a dead end. I think you describe it like this sometimes, too. It's meant to be like a skeleton almost. And what you try and encourage a lot of people to do is, after you take the assessment, sit down and do a coaching session with someone who understands the tool or might be able to ask you those good questions so that you can continue to reflect on it. Because that is so true what you said. We do speak and answer things through the lens of our personality, and sometimes what just naturally flows out of us in our speech is more accurate than when we try and answer an assessment or try and answer a question on paper. And so that is so important. And I think an emphasis on what, again, could be a dark side of the discovery process is that the assessment is a starting point. It's not a dead end. It's not an end all be all. It's not a label. It's not meant to pigeonhole you or put you in a box. It gives you tendencies, past tendencies and future tendencies. And so, like you said, there's not always a right answer to responding to someone, but it is so important that you know, whether you're the person that's looking at their results or you're the person looking at your own results, that it's not the end all be all. It is just a tool.
Yeah. We're getting toward the end of today's episode. We had a couple of more questions that I think you had put down there that we were going to respond to before we get to the end. Do you want to look at them, or do you want me to, like we talked about ingenuine, or that may be what you're saying when you said if someone is at work one way and they're in different environments a different way, are they being ingenuine?
So if y'all haven't listened to our last episode, I would encourage y'all. We talk a lot about the nurture and the nature. We framed it a
little different way in that one.
Yes, we did frame it. So if you want more conversations about that, I think the last episode does. But with that, sometimes we talk about this a lot when you take our assessment. You take it through the lens of relationship, ministry, or vocation, and sometimes you might answer a little bit differently. So in your experience, when you see how people respond and you're kind of evaluating that, is it ingenuine when people respond that they are this way in one environment or this way in the other? Or to even expand on that further, are they ingenuine when they are acting one way in ministry and one way in their relationship?
I don't think that they're necessarily being ingenuine. I always say, what is the motive? Like if you're not naturally a person that takes charge and you're put in a position to be in charge, then you may have to step up and be more forceful. You may have to be more assertive, and your personality may not be assertive. If you're someone that is very assertive and you're in an environment that you're not the one in charge, and you may have to step back a little bit and not be assertive. So I don't think you have to be ingenuine. I think you have to say, what is the motive? If I'm trying to project to you that I'm some funny, person, or that I think that's being ingenuine. But if you're looking at what the key is, what's your motive? Is your motive to influence people? Is your motive to be able to be what you need to be in that situation? So I don't think you have to be ingenuine to sometimes step into qualities, character traits that are not you, if you're put in that role and you're desiring to help other people based on the role that you're in.
Yes, and I think that is a great question for all of us to ask is, what is your motive? What is your motive when discovering your personality? What is your motive when you're interacting with people at work and ministry, when you're thinking about how do they perceive me? How do I project myself? What is your motive? And I think that is a great question to ask, especially in regards to a tool like a personality assessment, discovering more. What is your motive? Are you trying to discover more about yourself so that you can put your best show on for other people? Or are you trying to discover more about yourself so you can put your best show on that reflects the Lord and his design that you've given to you? So as we wrap up today, dwell on that question a little bit. Go back and watch our last episode if you haven't. If you haven't ordered or read our book yet, I believe the link should be in the description of this podcast. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on our website. And in our next episode, we'll continue to dive in more of what you will find in our book.